Hi guys, how are you today? Hope you're well. Hope your family and your friends are well. Hope you're enjoying the weather. Hope it's sticking around by the time you're watching this video. Right now it's the end of August as I'm recording this, so the weather is just starting to turn a little nicer. So Greece. Let me show you some of the books I'm using and drawing from. Hopefully my Humanities 256 World Myth class will recognize this book. And this is also, I love this book. I draw from it a lot when I'm talking about Greek mythology and ancient Greece. And then also the myth of the goddess, Evolution of an Image, Baring and Cashford. Drawn that one a lot. That's been a textbook of mine before. Okay, so Greece. What is it that is so special about Greece that I got to show both these classes? And, it's not like we don't see like Greek mythology shoved down our throats. You can go see Percy Jackson. You can go read Edith Hamilton. Maybe you did in high school, right? The humanities is different. Why? Humanities isn't your English lit class. It's not just the stories. Humanities is not just history. It's not just, oh, let's look at Philip II of Macedonia or Alexander the Great and the Peloponnesian Wars and it's not just looking at these dates and times, oftentimes is history. It's looking at the story, the cultural context, right? And I'm going to borrow from this book as I read. This is a perfect summation of why I love Greek myth and ancient Greece so much. At its finest, Greek mythology can be seen as the working out of a right relationship between these two cultures. That is, one culture between the dynamic sky and sun gods of the invading Indo-Europeans, and then the older lunar agricultural stratum culture of goddess worshippers that have been established for thousands of years, as we're going to see in a minute with the slideshow. So it's these two different cultures, right? And that's really cool. It's the working out of that. It's how Indo-Europeans that conquered still kept alive some of these really groovy goddess and god stories. But then at its worst, you know me, I got to talk paradox. At its worst, it is the debasement and the trivialization of the conquered culture. Well, what does that mean, right? It's the sky gods creating a new social stratum, a new hierarchy, right? Where, haha, we're the winners. Aggression, conquest, war. That's what they brought with them. And they played a number on some of the older stories, but they still were able to absorb their story. Right? So we're lucky. We still have a lot of this goddess culture that's fat within the new Greek patriarchal Zeus is the head dude, head kahuna god, right? That's very patriarchal. He rules the pantheon over all these other gods. Okay, let's go to the slideshow. I'm going to share a screen. So I'm not going to get as far as I want today, but essentially how myth changes. This is what I'm asking for you this week. This is where the rubber hits the road, right? When we look at myth, we're looking at a story of the already. Remember some of, in myth theory, you look at that. It's an already been, it's an already happening. It becomes historical. Well, myth to me is ahistorical, meaning we get to see how it still reflects in our world today. Hopefully they do that for you in history and in English myth, or sorry, English lit, right? But here, Greek myth is a wonderful revelation on how myth changes. We can really unpack it. Okay, so let's talk about the area for a minute. Can you see the screen okay? Here is all of the Greek islands. There's ancient Greece, right? And then we also have this big chief kahuna area called Crete. This island was a powerhouse. We're going to get into this a little bit more in a minute. Hesiod wrote that Crete was this amazing civilization known as the Minoan civilization that never saw war. You could barely tell the difference between the rulers and the servants. They had running water. They kept bookkeeping. They had an incredible wealth about them, and they weren't conquered until the very end. Why is that? As we're going to see, those Indo-European invasions that I've been talking ad nauseum about, they went through the mainlands, right? Coming from this direction into here, but they didn't get to all these islands until way late. Why is that? Because they were horse riders, and horses don't swim very well, right? And so these islands were the last vestiges of goddess culture. That's why we still have so much in this rich, juicy evidence of goddess culture, okay? So, you know, we think of contributions, and I don't want to go too far into this, but basically Greek myth, and this is probably what you know from English lit class, makes its contribution in two major literary forms, right? That's narrative poetry. That's Homer and Hesiod. Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? He didn't really, maybe he didn't write them, but we give him credit for it, around 800 BC. Hesiod, he's the one who wrote Theogony, which is like their creation stories, also around 700 or 800 BC, right? That's all the form of narrative poetry. Okay, Homeric hymns too, also attributed to Homer, but he didn't write them all. And the other great, wonderful contribution of Greece, can you guess? Do you know where I'm going with this? Theater, the birth of theater. And we're going to look at some of what that means. All of these contributions you're looking at right now, philosophies, art, democracy, etc., they're all intermingled. Meaning when you have a myth, you also have a piece of literature. Everybody knew all about the gods and goddesses. They never had to reintroduce them to you. So for hundreds and hundreds of years, you have all of these stories of Athena or all these stories of Zeus and Hera, because in Greek culture, everybody's writing off of what they already know about their gods and goddesses, right? The birth of theater also happens at the same time that the birth of democracy happens. How cool is that? So the plays that are written by these three main playwrights, Euripides, Sophocles, Aeschylus, are often about the issues that a society faces when trying to create a new democracy. Heck, we're still trying to figure it out, right? You know, we've got what's going on in our world right now, right? You've got all of these protests going on in all of these cities. And some people think, oh, these protesters are awful, their rights should be taken away, they're professional protesters or they're whatever kind of protesters. But protesting is part of our guarantee in a democracy, right? Freedom of speech and peaceful assembly. That started here in Greece, right? So some of these plays really still address that. Okay, maybe I'll come back into that. So this is a couple of things I'm going to ask you to look at and consider when it comes time for review and your quiz. Okay. Also, you can pause. Remember, you can pause the video anytime you want to take a screenshot or to listen again and again if I'm going too fast or if I'm not sounding clear. Remember, you can always do that. So essentially, though, looking at, here, I'm going to come back to the timeline. You can also look, here's your philosophers. We're not even going to get into philosophers in this class today or whenever. You guys can look that up on your own. If you want to look more up on the timeline of exactly what happens and all of those wars and stuff with Greece, there's your source, right? Okay, let's go back here, though, for a second. In these timelines, Cycladic, Minoan, Mycenaean, Archaic, Classical, Hellenistic. And by the way, I think the 400s was the golden age of Greece, so-called. Okay, Cycladic. Why is Cycladic important? If you look and see this yellow down here, those are the Cycladic islands. 3200. We're still in the, where are we? The Neolithic going into now the Bronze Age. So you have a time here in this time period where there's a ton of goddesses called the Cycladic goddesses. And they're a specific form that you see. And this is when this culture did really well. Minoan culture. Okay, we're going to come back to this, I know, ad nauseum. We're still talking about Minoan Crete, Carol. Oh my gosh. Okay, Minoan Crete. you might recognize the name Minoan, as in Minos, as in King Minos. Well, here's Crete down here. It's this big powerhouse of an island I was talking about earlier. It's interesting how in Greek myth, King Minos ticked off one of the gods, and then the gods, was it Hera or Athena, made his wife Pasiphae fall in love with a bull, and that's what gave birth to the Minotaur. Ugh. Anywho, so, but before we have those crazy stories from the Greeks, Minoan Crete was an amazing, amazing place. And I'm going to show you some more stuff there. Mycenaean. So this is, now there's a few different, there's the beginnings of, now we're in full throttle when it comes to the onslaught of the Kurgan, Aryan, Indo-European speaking invaders coming from the north and the west, right? Mycenaean probably is in through here, this area, okay? Then we have something called the Dark Ages, and this is what you got to know about. The Dark Ages, oh, nothing happened. You might be right there, but, right? No artistic turnout, no sophistication of anything. Everything goes dark. No writing, no nothing, right? And what ends up happening is, if during this Dark Ages is when all of these wars and fighting, remember 1100, 800, what's that smack dab in the middle of? The Iron Age. What is the Iron Age? The Iron Age, the war is the ethos of the Iron Age, right? And that's all you got. The good news is, probably during this Dark Age, even though there wasn't anything really created artistically, the oral traditions were still passed down. There was probably still a lot of storytelling going on. And then we get into the Archaic period, and that's when you have your Homer and your Hesiod. And all of this writing and all of this great literature and democracy and everything else starts to clarify, starts to precipitate. Okay. So these are the specifically the times I want you to be able to speak on and get comfortable with, okay? All right, so now we're gonna jump on here. So the Sea Peoples is another way of saying the Dorian, let's see, the Dorian invaders. So we've got the Dorians, Ionians, Aeolians. You've got all of these different tribes and different groups of the Sea Peoples who all worship a sky god. They're all coming in through a time period and taking over these areas, okay? And so what starts to happen is the goddesses, the symbols, the images, right, the art, it starts to get absorbed into the new patriarchal ideals, okay? So that means the bull and the sacred cow, Zeus and Hera, the vine grape, the vine god Dionysus. Dionysus, and we're going to get to him in a minute, was the god of the vine, right? And let's see, and so on and so forth. So you can just take a look here. All the goddesses are pieces of early culture of preserved goddess tradition. All the gods are either from the Sea Peoples or an appropriation of the goddess as the sun, as the vegetation god, as if the vine is ripe with the grapes and that's Dionysus, well, his mother goddess is the earth that gave sustenance so that vegetation could grow. So very much that agricultural cycle. Does that remind you of anything? Reminds us of many myths having to do with the grain or having to do with the mythical cycle, mythical wheel of the year. Okay, so you can look, if you want, on any of the gods and goddesses of Greece. And what I'm about to tell you and talk to you about is, I'm only going to take 3 or 4 of the gods and goddesses and unpack them as part of your assignment this week, okay? Having to do with Hera and Zeus, Athena, Dionysus. But you could do this to any of the gods and goddesses of Greece, okay? Okay, so going back to Grecian history now, we talked about the bull, right? We see the bull crystallized in Greek mythology. We remember the Minotaur. The Minotaur is a monster, right? Born out of, because Pasiphae basically had intercourse with a bull because someone put some kind of magical spell on her. She is the queen of Crete, Okay. And so she gives birth to the monster and they throw him in a labyrinth and all these, it's very sad. And they have to sacrifice children to him. And I think that's where the Hunger Games came from. Look it up. And then we also have the bull, as Zeus. Zeus wants to make love, have intercourse, whatever. So he seduces slash, assaults Europa because he loves her. So the bull here is seen in a very, very, wouldn't you say, interesting kind of ugly light, right? Because they're used for kind of foul purposes. Well, again, the bull was no stranger to this area. The bull has a huge origin story in ancient Greece before the sea peoples came. Those sea peoples, then, they took the story of the bull and they made it their own, right? But before that, the bull was this most esteemed figure. And there was actually something called bull leaping. Maybe it's associated now with the running of the bulls, I don't know, or bullfights, I don't know. But you can kind of see the connect the dots with our legacy with the bull. Bull leaping was something they did. This is a fresco found in ancient Crete in one of their palaces. And it shows this person is literally grabbing the bull by the horns, and then they're flipping over the bull, and then there's somebody here waiting to catch them. And so this was like, obviously you're taking your life into your hands or what have you, but the whole idea and the whole aesthetic of the bull was seen as something in a whole sacred light. And that's one of the two big things I keep coming back to, is this idea of the agricultural peoples of the ancient goddess cultures all over Europe, all over the world, especially where we're focused on in the Greek Isles. There is the sacralization of nature, or this incredible reverence for nature, right? That doesn't exist with a sky god riding nomads who did not do agriculture, who only took what they wanted and rode on as nomads, right? We've inherited both of these ideals, right? We're going to get to that when we get to colonization, as you will see. Okay. So here's Sir Arthur Evans. About 150 years ago, he went and he did all this stuff on Crete. He found out about, how long they lasted. They lasted so far into closer to the Iron Age because they were an island and none of the conquerors could get to them. He went and checked it out. He couldn't find anything. And then he went back and looked under the flooring, they're not floorboards, I think they would have been stone. And he found all of this amazing funeral urns and all of these goddesses. Goddesses associated with snakes, associated with lions, associated with the owl, other birds. And so then you start to connect the dots with all of these different islands and how they all connected to one another. They, Crete was known for its trade. It traded with Africa. It traded with everywhere. So it always knew what was going on, right? It also had, so it was a very wealthy island. That's why they call it the Minoan period in your timeline, right? So here is a picture of Crete. Oh, how beautiful it is, right? I don't know why I have that there. Why did I have this 16? So then, okay, I'm going now into, here we are. Here's Crete. And here's Troy up here, right? Over here, way over here, is Catalhayak, right? And then the Near East, Sumeria, remember Sumer, right? So here is still Greece. Over here is the rest of Western Europe. Okay, so just kind of giving you a sense. I think Corfu is over here. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. Okay, so now Dionysus, the birth of theater. How cool is that? Why is, even though we only have basically one play by the original playwright, who wrote it? Was it Sophocles? Euripides. Euripides wrote the Bacchae, which is kind of has this like stunning role for the goddess Dionysus. Now Dionysus was, as the vegetation son of the mother goddess, he was known as Zagreus, Zagreus, in earlier times. And so then he was absorbed into the pantheon as part of Zeus's pantheon, Greek pantheon. And so Dionysus is what? This god of wine, who's both the god of what they call ecstasy and the agony, right? Look at the faces on drama, right? And so there was this insights. Very cool. Sorry, bear with me. 529, where is it? Why don't I have it? And then Dionysus, sorry. So I'm borrowing from this book again. I'm already at 20 minutes, so I'm going to probably pause here in a second. Okay. So Athens' annual festival honoring Dionysus, the city Dionysia, gave birth to a new art form, theatrical production of both tragedy and comedy, agony and ecstasy, right? The two modes reflect the paradoxical qualities of the wine god, whereas tragedy emphasizes Dionysus' frightening mutability and nature's irresistible law of change that sparks unexpected reversals of fortune, as you see. And when you hear something called a Greek tragedy, that's what they're talking about. It's also comedy celebrates the beneficent life force that Dionysus embodies. The great Athenian playwrights reworked ancient myth, illustrating Dionysian motifs of suffering, sacrifice, rebirth, and reintegration. Okay, and then, although the city Dionysia regularly featured any kind of these regular contests, let's see. Okay, let's see. They would open with an opening choral. Oh no, I'm going to stop there. Hold on. Held annually in March, the city Dionysia began with a noisy procession of citizens carrying emblems of the god's cult, grotesque masks representing his diverse manifestation, sacred phalluses, and an effigy of a mutilated and dismembered Dionysus, a practice that Herodotus, another writer, traces back to the Egyptian god Osiris. You checked that story out before? It's cool. It's about how this god gets pulled apart, but it's part of a resurrection story into the dark, and then he has a rebirth, right? And where all of his parts are reborn, and where now again the vine can grow, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the separation of the self and then the return. So it's that, again, the agricultural cycle. This makes Dionysus, a couple ways to say that, but I say Dionysus, I think that's right. The year god. The year god. So the year god can be, again, part of something that has to do with the goddess as the center of the drama, and the year god as either the old king, like old King Arthur, or the young prince, like Lancelot, right? There's a lot of ways to look at the year god. And so then Dionysus is like the year god, and like he is the sun. He's the young prince. Isn't that an archetype? Bet you could paint one as. Okay, so we're already at 23 minutes. I can't believe it. If you want to see the beginning of theater, go check that out. That's the book. I won't tell you everything about the Bacchae, but it is a fabulous Greek tragedy, and it really features Dionysus. You can see, last point made, syncretism. What is syncretism? That will be a question on your quiz, having to do with the transference. How do we transfer myth? How does it grow? How does it change? Because Dionysus has been compared to a lot of other gods, cultural and historical figures. Tell me who they are. Okay, so we're going to stop there, and I'll see you guys in a few minutes for part 2.